is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizard's Holiday, Chapter 6, and up until the sentence, I can manage, in Chapter 7. In these chapters, Nita and Kit arrive on Alaalu, and everything seems amazing. I expected it to be so much creepier and spookier right off the bat, and it's not, and that is what is making me so nervous. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Patricia for commissioning this episode. Patricia, if you are out there listening, thanks a bunch. Appreciate you. This is a really much more amiable and comfortable introduction to this planet than I was expecting. I really thought whatever was going on here was going to become, if not immediately apparent, I didn't really think that, but at least that there would be a sort of sense of unease, and there doesn't really seem to be at all yet. Also, at one point, Nita is looking around at the planet itself, and she's thinking, it definitely reminds me of something, and then thinks, whatever it is, it's something good, which I really did not expect. I fully thought that it was meant to be negative. So I feel like I'm completely on, what's the word? Unfamiliar territory here. I mean, that's a given. What's the word I want? Uncertain ground, I guess? Because I had an idea of how this all was going to go and what the tone was going to be. And it just hasn't wound up being like that at all. And a part of me is like glad, because I said from the start that what I wanted was a vacation, like a genuine vacation for my guys who have been through so much and keep having to deal with the same shit. But then I wound up like almost immediately starting to take that back, because it felt like, well, I do want them to have a good time and actually get to relax. But also, I feel like I would rather the shoe drop sooner rather than later. Is that like a bad attitude to have? So this chapter begins with the arrival of Quilt, which they each say her name to her, and she's like, that's close enough. And I have to say, I've mentioned before the audiobook narrator and how excellent I think she is. And I truly do feel like where she shines is doing odd sorts of voices like this. When she is narrating from this particular character and from also the ones that have come to stay at Nita's house with Dareen, she manages to get across somebody who isn't really familiar with the intonations of a language, or they get it mostly right, but not completely. And she does that so consistently, where everybody sounds different, but they all manage to sound just a little bit off, and not necessarily in a way that's creepy or anything, but it does really zero in on the fact that like these people they're not humans. They are not familiar with our ways of doing anything. And I feel like that's a really hard thing to pull off. And I realized as I was reading this, because I did the audiobook for like the first half, and then I switched to the book for the second half, it doesn't come across quite as well just via text. Because that's, I'm not trying to throw any aspersions on her writing. I'm just saying that the alienness of these people can be sort of easy to forget when you're just reading it, because of how natural the words read on the page. And I kind of appreciate the constant reminder in the audiobook with the odd intonations and ways of speaking that, no, these people, they're not regular people, and that they're always going to feel a little bit weird and uncertain. And that doesn't make them sinister. It just makes them, alien. I don't know. This narrator has been excellent. I've said so from the start, but I felt like this was really a series of chapters where she got to do a lot. And even like the chapter before where Nita and Kit are like on their trip, the way that she does the voice of the woman who is talking to them about how few people ever go visit Alaalu, she is outstanding with that. So I just wanted to give her some props. So Quelt is super tall. She has dark brown skin like polished wood. Long, narrow face, high cheekbones, large eyes, and a silvery blonde growth of something like hair, reaching to a long, soft ponytail down the back of her neck to about the middle of her back. The effect of the fair hair against the dark, dark skin was striking, and Nita thought very stylish. So yeah, I kept imagining a creature that looks sort of like either the creatures from Avatar, whose name I can't remember, and also the creatures that build the clones in the Clone Wars from Star Wars. I can't remember either of these beings' names, but if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, I just really feel like this description got a particular look across in my head. It was well done. And she is super friendly, glad to see them, and has done her research. This isn't a feeling like it is with Rashawn. I cannot handle that, guys. Link, where it seems like he stumbled into this and seems to have no idea what the fuck is going on. She definitely has checked out what it's going to be like for the two of them and who they are, how to say their names, the things that are... At one point, she like shakes their hands, and she's really proud of herself for knowing one of their customs, which I thought was adorable. And she says, I've only once met a wizard who wasn't Alaalid. And I was like, who is that? She says, but never mind that. And I was like, no, mind that. Who were they? What were they like? I want to know. And she knows Paunch, too, which I was a little bit surprised by. I wasn't really sure what kind of information they were going to transmit about him, considering that, like, Kit is meant to be the main person here, and Paunch is sort of along for the ride. And personally, I was gratified that Paunch was included, evidently, that his information was part of this. Like, it just felt to me sort of... I don't know. It was a compliment, It felt like he was being granted some respect in a way that I wasn't really... It's not that I don't think he's respected by the powers that be, but I wasn't really sure if it was going to continue being that he was meant to be like a sidekick instead of a person of his own. And this, for me, feels like we're heading in a direction with Paunch becoming even more his own character. And I'm into that. So... So yeah, my Pobby and Toppy are waiting to meet you. Come on. So they're heading down to the house, and Quelt starts asking them if the weather is okay. And this was really interesting to me. Let me know if anything goes wrong or if it's cold for you or anything. If the weather starts to act up, I'll fix it. Are you allowed to do that? Nita said. And then she thought about it for a moment and added, well, I guess you would be if you're the only wizard here. Oh, yes, Quelt said. I listen to what the telling has to say about the way the weather is at the moment, and if there's a problem, or if I'm not to change it for some other reason, those who are send me word. But beyond that, I've been working with the weather here for long enough now that they seem to trust me with it. So here goes another thing that I really love about this woman's writing, is, again, how she has the manual sort of manifest completely differently for different people. I just love this idea, and I know we've seen it before, but it catches me by surprise every time. You know, I get used to it because I think that the person that we just met, who has it manifest in a particular way to them, is going to be the last person who has a weird manifestation. And that, you know, once the next person we meet will go back to the book being the thing. And every time that it turns out there's yet another way for this to manifest, I keep being startled by it. And I don't mean that in, you know, like, it's not completely taking me off guard now that we are familiar with this concept. It's more that, like, I sort of can't, I imagine that what Diane Duane has to do is sit down and brainstorm all of the variety of ways in which this could manifest for people. And then she just slowly pulls various examples that she's come up with out over the course of the series. But the telling is interesting because it feels sort of similar to the way that it worked with, I can't remember what the kid is that Nita gets a crush on in Ireland, but he wakes up just sort of knowing a thing. He finds out that they have a book and he seems really like frustrated and jealous that they have a book. But Quilt doesn't have that energy. She's, first of all, instead of just waking up and knowing it, it's similarly mental with her. But it's more that she asks a question and sort of waits and listens for the answer, which feels slightly more interactive and like she has a little bit more control than the boy did. And it just might be my understanding of the way things worked for him isn't quite correct. But yeah, I love that for, like, I love that how that works for her. And that it's called the telling. That feels like, I don't know, there's something about her naming it that feels like the sort of name you'd give something when you were a kid, and it just begins to, like, you forget how it sounds to people, and then you get older and you really stop and think about it, and you're like, that is kind of a weird name. It works, and I still stand by it, but that is sort of a funny thing that I came up with there. Also, instead of the powers that be, it's those who are, which I really like that. There's some Bible quote, and it was one of the few, you know, people quote the Bible all the time, and growing up, my dad did all the time, and Bible quotes were all over everything, and very few made much of an impression on me. But there was one that was, and I'm wildly paraphrasing here, but it said something like, you know, at the beginning of everything, it's something like, believe that I am God, I am, and at the beginning of everything, I am. Something like that, where it's, instead of at the beginning of everything I was, which was what I was expecting, the beginning of everything I am, suggesting that the beginning of everything is happening simultaneous to this moment, which felt very sci-fi to me for something that was supposed to be religious. And sort of blew my mind, the idea that, like, in the Bible, there's a sort of acknowledgement of, like, parallel time. And I don't really know that that's, you know, what that was supposed to, how that's meant to be interpreted, but that was how I took it. And because of that, the fact that she says those who are, be, like, the powers that be, feels so, that's a phrase that we use all the time for, like, any sort of group that is in an authority position that we don't really know or care to, like, enumerate specifically. And so it has a certain vibe that it's unavoidable. I have baggage along with it, you know? When you say the powers that be won't let us do such and such, that could apply to anything from high school, like, you know, your principals and teachers, to the IRS when you get older, your boss, whatever. But those who are doesn't have that. And it's so fresh sounding to me because of that. So for some reason, this just caught me and I really prefer it. And I'm not mad that the powers that be is what Nita and Kit use. I mean, it makes sense. But I just feel like if I were going to adopt one of these myself, that's probably the one that I would pick. So yeah, she asks about the telling as a physical thing. And when they show it to her, she's like, don't you like forget and leave this places? And Kit says, well, if we don't feel like physically carrying them, we can pull the fabric of space apart and stuff the manual in a pocket. That could be tricky, Quelt said thoughtfully. It can be, said Nita, but she was interrupted by a sudden flurry of crazy barking from Paunch as he came to the top of the rise, saw something that excited him, and dived down over the far side. So it turns out that he is attacking a flock of bird-like creatures that this family herds and farms, and they process a secretion that they make. And it's one of those things that, like, it sounds so gross when you say it like that, but like, what is milk if not a secretion? You know what I mean? Like, that's how it is with food. If you think about anything for very long, you're overwhelmed by how gross it actually is. So as much as there was an instinct in me to go just like, ugh, I had to stop myself and be like, well, I mean, makes sense. Punch came rocketing out of the reeds at the bottom of the rise and shot straight toward the pen. All of the pom-poms leaped into the air and kept on going, as if every one of them suddenly sprouted wide, golden or cream-white wings. So Paunch, eventually, they like kind of get him back in hand, and he apologizes. But there is a moment where he's like, if they didn't want to be chased, they shouldn't have run off. Shesh is a food precursor. They make a secretion that we process. It's kind of complicated, but it tastes really good when you're done with it. We trade it to other people all over the island. It's very much in demand. I should warn you, my Toppy is really passionate about it. Don't get him started. You'll be hearing about Shesh all night. And as it turns out, Nita does indeed bring it up and finds out that Quelt was not wrong. He can talk about this all night. And it's also really compelling here, guys. Because in the file that they were given, it's mentioned that Quelt's father chooses to do manual labor past a point when it's not actually a requirement and it's not really traditionally done by most people on this planet. And when Nita brings this up, Quelt is genuinely kind of puzzled and is like, well, no, we don't need to work. He likes doing this. He's very passionate about it, but he doesn't have to. Do people have to in your world? And this keeps coming up that essentially in this world, everybody just gives one another the things they need. And they cannot comprehend, if you have enough, why you wouldn't just give the excess to people who don't have. It's very obvious, at least it seems obvious to me, that this universe does not operate on money. They seem to be doing a whole other thing here. I do not know if we're going to find out that they have money and it's just looked at slightly differently than, the way that we see money, but it would still be termed that. But yeah, from what I am seeing, it just seems like they work on trade and they work with an understanding that you just need to keep as much as you need to stay alive. And beyond that, you don't really, why would you hold on to more than you act? And I'm just like, oh, God, what's sort of interesting is that I was expecting this world to simultaneously be kind of primitive. And once we actually get into the house, it's mentioned that Nita can see some intense technology. It's not like they don't have any. It is mentioned that it's difficult to sustain production of technology because the way their planet is, it doesn't have a lot of metal on it. So due to that, like, things can be rarer and higher in value. And it turns out that, like, Quelt's job can pretty consistently be pulling metal out of the ground, which I thought was kind of wild. Like, she's basically mining on their behalf. It turns out they get most of their metal from these plants that are called, I think, iron grass or iron reeds, something like that, which I think is a really neat idea. The concept of having a plant that has such concentrations of a particular metal that you can process the plant to get the metal out of it. I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, this whole thing being that they trade and don't seem to have money, if that's true, but they do have technology, then the technology isn't actually considered a luxury, I don't think. Well, see, this is the thing that I find really interesting when you start to get down to the concept of trading and not having money. Are luxuries still a thing? Do people want and are unable to get certain luxuries? Or does everybody have access to them? And so nothing seems like a luxury because everybody has them. Like, this technology, how widely available is it? Because, we have in our universe, there is a certain number of things that you need to just survive and get by. And that would be, shelter, access to safe, clean drinking water and food and medical care and community and society. And yet we still want extra fun things. We still want a hot tub, for example, just, as a particularly luxury item. I'll use that. Do they have something like this in this world? And the fact that they have cities, that points to people wanting different things. It's talked about at dinner that some people prefer to live in the cities and be around lots of new and unfamiliar faces. And that Quelt's family isn't really into that. And they don't judge people who are, but they really like being kind of isolated and being around people they know well. And so this is not by any means a planet where we're pretending everyone is a monolith. So I'm just really curious how it works to live and be in a society where things are sort of just given based on who wants and who doesn't. And how much, if there's a scarcity of metal, especially, how much that influences whether or not something is seen as a luxury and whether or not certain people are kept from accessing it. I'm really overthinking this, I'm sure. But you know what I mean? Like, this, I have a lot of questions about this. And I feel like Diane Duane is the type of writer that will acknowledge that sort of thing. She just gets very in-depth on detail about a lot of things that I don't think many writers would necessarily care to pay attention to. And due to that, I have a little bit more faith that she will actually address some of like this detailed stuff that nobody would care about except for myself. Because, or not that nobody would care about, but like just the sort of thing that I don't feel a lot of writers would be interested in spending time on. So let's see. So yeah, she says that her parents have made a ton of food. And Nita and Kit both start laughing because they recognize that this is just sort of like a parental trait, wanting to feed guests, which, yeah, this is like universal. Nita was astounded to find the parents even taller and more beautiful than Quelt. Cuillin Pilayan, Quelt's Tapi, and Demer Pilayan, Quelt's Pabi, each towered at least 2 feet above their daughter. And they sit down, they have dinner, and I really enjoy so much the way that this, like, or no, first they go and change. I forgot about this. The careful guest perhaps wants to show the other diners honor. She suggests, that's the mom, that they maybe go ahead and change for dinner. And there's something about her saying it that way that I just love. I don't know what it is. It's the sort of thing that I think like you could take as being a little bit passive aggressive, but I took as sort of more like, I'm going to explain the concept behind why we change for dinner, which I respect a lot more than just it being a tradition in a general sense. You know, that's a thing that's so in, what's the word I want? Like in a society like ours, in upper class society, it was considered the thing to do was to change for dinner. And it always felt like a pretension to me, like a means of being able to show off your wardrobe, that you even have a change of clothes for dinner versus, you know, everybody else who might only have the one dress to wear for the next 2 days. But her framing it as something like showing the other guests honor, for me, was really a nice way of reframing it and sort of probably getting to the heart of why that tradition was even started to begin with, like long ago, which I never actually stopped to wonder about it, but probably that is what was meant to be the thing. Nita, feeling the heat, got into one of her beach wraps and put a light jacket over it. I found that to sound like the weirdest outfit. I don't know if that's just me, you guys, but that just, for me, it just sounded like such a weird choice of outfit. A beach wrap with a jacket over it? I don't get it. It's not important, but I just had to, you know. It was strange to look down the table at the vast array of bowls and plates and platters, filled with dishes hot or cold that sported unfamiliar shapes and colors, greens and blues very much in evidence. She laughed to herself as she saw Kit go straight for the blue foods, so that Quelt's mother laughed and passed him more of them. For her own part, Nita sat there dealing with her first really leisurely contact with alien foods, smells and textures that she'd never encountered but that were nonetheless instantly appetizing. A bowl of some bright orange sauce to dribble over a plateful of something that smelled most deliciously of fried chicken, but tasted like sweet and sour pork. And Quelt is saying, our body chemistries are a lot alike. We're both using iron as the heart of the molecule that carries oxygen around in our blood. And I really like this, explanation as to why the food works so well for them. Also, I really love the particular description of the foods and the ways that it looks and smells different than what you would expect, but it's still appetizing. You guys know me, food is very important to me personally as a human being. And I also the comfort aspect of this trip really does, for me, depend somewhat heavily on whether or not they are going to be fed well. How are you going to enjoy a vacation where it doesn't feel like the food you're eating is any good? So I know that this is probably a silly thing to get hung up on, but I was concerned about it, and I'm pleased that that's being addressed in a way that's satisfactory. So eventually, when they finally begin to fill up on food, Nina had started out thinking of this as a sort of alien cheese, the shesh. But then she realized that such an appraisal fell very far short of the mark. There were too many ways to treat the shesh, as she found out when she made the mistake of getting Cuillin talking about it. The storage processing, pressing, coloring, and texturization of the foodstuff, the handling of its seasonal variations, its preparation for dining, using at least 100 technical terms that Nita hadn't realized even occurred in the speech. Hearing them now, she found herself wondering whether there were some wizards who practiced their art exclusively in the culinary mode, forsaking all other usage. Or more likely, she thought, it's true what we've always read in the manual, that wizardry is only another kind of science, just one with its roots sunk deeper into the universe than most. So I really liked this, of course, again, as somebody who cooks and who loves food, the idea of somebody being a wizard, but like using their abilities specifically in the kitchen and only in the kitchen. I mean, it's not a new concept. There's a whole like kitchen witch idea, concept out there. So it's not like this has never been heard of before, but I just didn't expect to see it in this. And that was kind of a fun acknowledgement, So they go out, and this is the moment that I was talking about, watching the sun go down in a great blaze of fire, peach and orange and gold against that sky, which despite a touch of green, or perhaps because of it, seemed more intensely blue than any Nita had ever seen on Earth. That color ran chills down Nita's neck once or twice when she looked up at it. What is it? She wondered. What is it about this place that reminds me of something else? Whatever else it reminds me of, it's good. So, again, I just really was not ready for her to say it's good. I was certain that she was going to say something like, whatever else it reminds me of, I'm still enjoying myself despite that reminder of something that's like unpleasant. And it just surprised me a lot that it turned out to not be that at all. So this is when she asks, can anyone live in a place like this? And Quelt's mother just doesn't really even understand the question, because they obviously don't have the same kind of concept that we have of certain real estate being valuable and out of reach of certain beings. Also, their planet is so much bigger than ours, and so their population is not nearly as dense, and they're not fighting for the same areas to settle the way that we are on Earth. And let's see, this is no crowded world. There's much more sea than land. The sea is open-handed with us and gives us more than enough food for everyone. People who have more than they need give to those who have less if they need it. Why? How is it in your world? Nita started to answer, then stopped herself. She was disinclined to break the perfect spell of quiet. It's different, she said. It's very different. People don't give that readily in my world. But what's the matter with them? Quelt's mother said. Don't they have enough? That's a real good question, Quelt's mother. I saw a headline the other day, guys. I think it was from the New York Times, about how millionaires are worried they're leaving too much money to their children. And I swear to God, I have never wanted to commit homicide so badly in my entire life. Oh my God, what if leaving this much money to my kids is actually debilitating for them in some way and stunts their growth? Oh my God, whatever am I to do? What is it like to just be so completely disconnected? That you, I didn't read the article. I will grant you this. But they had to have interviewed people for this. People had to go on record actually stating this as a concern. And I can't imagine being willing to do that, to be that fucking tone deaf, that you would put your name to a concern that completely bonkers. Like, it's just... What's the matter with them? Don't they have enough? Of many things, Nita said. Maybe not. There are so many of us. Nita, I love you, but no. There's plenty. There just is. You know, we have this whole story that we've been told about how it's overpopulation. That's the problem. And that's a very, it's a very classist, white supremacist assertion. And it's posed the way that it is so that we blame the poor for not controlling their reproduction. And thus we can settle all of our trials and tribulations on this out of control population. When in fact, it's capitalism. It's always been capitalism. That's pure and simple what it is. We have enough to feed everybody. We throw it away. We have enough to clothe everybody, but we charge incredible amounts of money for it and then throw it away. We have enough. We have enough. We just do. We have enough. That's all there is to it. Anyway. So she shows them in the manual too, the comparative size of Earth to Alaalu, and they're like, "Oh my God, your planet's so small." And Quelt's mother says, "You'll be here for days. Maybe you can make us understand. If not, don't worry about it. This is supposed to be a holiday for you." Maybe it's strange to us, Llewellyn said, that people from such a rich inner world with so much technology would come here and willingly spend time with shepherds. And your planet sounds like a wonder place. Cities all over the place, as many of them as grains of sand. And Nita's like, I mean, sure, but I think this is better. And I'm like, you think? Doy. So at this point, Kit asks Llewellyn if he can watch him make shesh the next day. And Llewellyn is like, hell yeah, you can. And I'll also put you to work. Thank you for offering. This is when it's mentioned that they can get metal from plants. And when they talk about that there is a traveling smelter, Kit is like, oh, so does your government organize that? And it turns out they don't actually know what government is, because evidently it just seems built into their society that they are giving and want the best for everybody. So they don't need a governing body to make them be decent to one another, which is wild. I would like that very much. And let's see. They went back to the house, and Demare moved about, lighting little oil lamps in the various rooms and on the dining table. And they bring out more food. Nita says to Kit, via their telepathy, that he can just feed Paunch under the table, and because they just don't think that they can eat anymore. And at this point, if you go to the cities, Demare said, I have a list for you. Not that I'm going to have time for your list if I'm with famous people, Quell said. And they look up and they're like, what? And she's like, oh yeah. I mean, our planet has only one wizard. So the fact that others are coming to visit, your pictures, as she says, are all over the talk nets. Everyone thinks you're very elegant. Normally they all take me for granted, but now I'm in danger of becoming famous myself. It's wild to me that she isn't already famous, being that she's the only wizard on the planet, but I guess things just work differently here. It's because you're so small. Once we weren't as tall as we are now, but in the days of the ancients, everyone was more your size, little, which is also how it is here on Earth. You know, people before us were much smaller. It's attributed, I think, a lot to just having access to better nutrition. So our bodies grow stronger and larger than they did. So let's see. At this point, she says it's time for the keks pretty soon. And they go down to the beach, And there are these really cool little creatures, blue, green, and shining, flooding up out of the water onto the beach. They had a lot of legs like crabs, but no pincers. They had eyes like crabs, though, and the general look of them as they scuttled around was very crab-like. Soon the wet gleam of sand was obscured, black all up and down the length of the beach. The crabs started to dig, throwing the peach-colored sand up behind them. The whole beach became obscured by the haze created by sand in the air, sand kicked up by millions of little legs. "What are they doing?" Nita whispered. "Watch," said Quilt. They watched while some of the tiny satellites that were all Alaalu had by the way of moons went sliding by overhead, and slowly the beach above the waterline began to be obscured by something that was not flat. The Keks were building. "What are they making?" "We don't know," Quilt said. "No one knows. They build these things in the sand, then they go back in the water by midnight, and the next night they come and do it again. They've always done it, as far as I know, since our people began to notice things." The crabs sculpted the sand, shapes reared up, little cones with holes. They would collapse, get built again, collapse once more, and finally the Keks got tired of it and slowly, one by one, started going into the sea again. And I really don't know what to make of this. I'm super curious if this is like just going to be a weird thing that happens on this planet, which I would be fine with, to be perfectly honest, or if this is going to wind up having some kind of significance. So at this point, they are really tired. Quilt leads them to this building, thatched with ironwood like the other buildings, and had several open wood windows that let the warm night breeze in. If you have a gender separability thing at your age, don't you? Is this all right? There's something about that just is so funny to me. Like, when it's pointed out how we act regarding gender, it really is wild how completely arbitrary and stupid it is. You know, and then you're just like, oh, yeah, why do we? I mean, yeah, that's true, but also like, what? There's a big couch on each side, some coverings and cushions if you need them. I'm glad you came. This is going to be fun. The coolness of this whole situation, Kit said, cannot possibly be overstated. And Nita is like, yeah, this is completely rad. I think this is going to be an awesome vacation. So, on either side of the screen, they went to sleep under strange stars, and for the first time, did it not on errantry, when anything might happen, but in safety and at leisure. Nothing seemed strange about the stars here, and that odd high horizon somehow made the sky seem smaller, a cozier and more protected place. Nita fell asleep at the sound of the sea whispering in her ears. And later on, there were other whispers entirely, but all friendly ones. "This is so great," she thought, once in the middle of the night as she turned over and saw, not her own dark bedroom wall with the occasional late-night car headlight, but the nearby low, wide window opening onto the sea. "So great. I love being a wizard." And she fell asleep again, while all around her, cheerful, unperturbed like the wind, the whispers went on. "Everything's fine." I don't like that. I don't like that. I was feeling good about it. You lulled me. And then you just had to throw out the everything, like, mean, rude, mean-spirited. I don't like it, and I think you're mean. So then I get into a little bit of Chapter 7. Again, thank you, Jacob, for the chapter breakdown. And what we have is our whole group is going to go on an excursion to the mall. By the end of the section that I read, we have not gotten to the mall. We have agreed to walk to the mall. But because she was going, Dareen was planning on just doing like one of those, magical sort of connections. And everybody is like, what do you mean? We want to see your planet. This is what's really interesting in comparison to what it's like on Alaalu, is that like you get to be an actual celebrity, welcomed with open arms, admiration, excitement, because of who you are as a wizard, as an alien. And then Earth, you not only can't be who you are as a wizard. But as an alien, you have to wear this like elaborate illusionary disguise, which honestly, the Earth seems like trash compared to all these other planets. Like, and I shouldn't blame the Earth. Humankind seems real trashy. Like, all these other worlds out there seem to really have their shit figured out a whole lot more than we do. And I just feel for these guys having to go through the effort they do to just learn about the place, and how much Dareen is afraid to let them roam around or be seen, you know? Oh, Mordecai is here. Hi. Well, Philip will float you to the mall. I guess because I think he says something about when she brings up the concrete, and he's just like, well, I've had to like walk over your floors. I couldn't wade through those. So I think it'll be fine, which is a good point. So let's see. Dareen rolled over her bed and clutched the pillow over her head because she's hearing, Dareen, where are they? And Philip is standing right next to her bed. Guys, I love this recurring thing that keeps happening where Philip will give her a look and she doesn't understand how he can be giving her that look when he's a tree, but she knows that he's giving her that look. And every time she's like, how can I tell that he's giving me that look? And then it ends with, maybe it's the berries. Every time. I am like just delighted with this ongoing joke. I find it really funny. So yeah, Philip says, there's someone who wants you. Dareen sat up, rubbing her eyes and trying to become more conscious. Her body was resisting her. She felt wrecked. If I feel like this at home, what would I have felt like if I'd gone away? Maybe this whole excursus thing wasn't such a great idea. So... Let's see. She's scattering around her room to find a pair of jeans. Then she realized that Philip was standing on them. Phil, she said, could I get you to move sideways a little? Philip backed away, looking around her room. This is interesting. It's so enclosed. You've got to show me your home, Dareen said, when we have a moment. But I have a feeling that's not going to be for a while. So, she goes downstairs, and Carmela is there. It's 9:30 in the morning. She's already at their house. This is like, she's very, very eager. She leaned across the table towards Scarrett and grabbed one of his clawed forelegs, wiggling it back and forth. Scarrett chuckled, a raspy, ratchety little sound. I mean, look at this guy. Dareen stared at Carmela. I thought you hated bugs. Bugs? Yeah, but Scarrett's not a bug. I mean, look at the size of him. Nobody's going to have to worry about him going down their back or getting in their shoes. One of Scarrett's eyes came around to waver almost in front of Carmela's nose. She grabbed the stalk just behind the eye and wiggled it too, playfully. And look at all these eyes he's got. He's just terrific. Thank you, Scarrett said. You're an amiable being, and I like you too. There is something about this that is so sweet and also like a little bit like Carmela just grabbing at his various body parts. I'm like, girl, keep your hands to yourself. What are you doing? Stop it. Like, I understand like the good-heartedness behind it, but you know, it's like white women reaching out and touching black women's hair. Like, just don't. What are you doing? Stop. Just don't touch people. But yeah. So, he seems to be perfectly fine with it. He's enjoying himself. But I just ask at least. Although she's been down there for a minute. So maybe she's already talked to him about it. Maybe they've got an understanding at this point. I don't know. Dareen had to smile. The attitude was so like him generally. It's a shame he can't stay around a while after this is over, she thought. So I think that Dareen has a favorite. I think Scarrett might be her favorite one. Let's see. The sound of rustling in the doorway brought Carmela's head around. "And what have we here?" she said. "Why, you're just some kind of wonderful shrub. Aren't you cute?" "You're not bad looking for a biped yourself," Phyllis said. Doreen gave him a look from the kitchen. "You flirt," she said. "Well, it's true," Phyllis said. It was impossible to say how one perceived that a tree was winking at you, but Doreen perceived it. Maybe it's the berries, she thought. What made Doreen have to control herself very carefully for the next couple of minutes was Carmela's response, because she perceived the winking too. "You tease," she said, and ran an affectionate hand through Philip's needles. "Doreen, is it possible to become an item with a tree?" I love this. I do not know what is going to happen here, but Carmela being into a tree is the best thing. I adore it. It's so weird. It's just so weird. I fucking love this. It's just, this is like some Chuck Tingle type shit. I'm into it, for the record. Doreen heard footsteps on the basement stairs and winced. Let's give Rashawn another chance, she thought. Maybe I just got off on the wrong foot with him yesterday. Rashawn came into the kitchen, and at first sight of him, all of Doreen's good intentions evaporated. He was even more splendidly dressed than he had been the day before. Today, the long overjacket that he favored was in blue, richly, even thickly embroidered with jewels in all shades of blue and green, some of them the size of marbles or quail's eggs. Gauntlets, tunic, boots, all were in metallic blues and greens, and the fillet binding his brows was of some blue metal. "Good morning," Doreen said to Rashawn. Rashawn merely nodded and swept through the kitchen into the sunny dining room. And Doreen is just like, oh, fuck this guy. Rashawn paused in the doorway, gazing in at his fellow wizards and at Carmela. It was a second or so before Carmela turned most casually and looked Rashawn up and down. "A little early for such a big fashion statement," she said, "but maybe some of us need to start early. And you would be?" Rashawn straightened up even straighter and taller than he had been standing, if that was possible, and gazed at Carmela. "That's Rashawn," Doreen said, and then he says the whole rest of his name, which I 100% absolutely will not be saying. Ever. Carmela stood there watching Rashawn go through this performance with the vaguely impatient expression of someone who's arrived at the movies on time and then has to sit through 10 minutes of commercials and previews. "He means he's a prince," Doreen said, not entirely kindly. Carmela regarded Rashawn in the most leisurely manner possible. "No methane," she said at last. "I don't know what that means. What does she mean by that?" "2 legs. These she gave a last non-committal glance, which suggested that perhaps he'd put them on backward that morning, but she wasn't going to embarrass him by mentioning it. "Well, 1 out of 4 is not bad. Let's go for 2. You wouldn't have a battle fleet on you, would you?" "We have not yet been formally introduced in that Rashawn finally said, trying hard to sound chilly about it. Doreen opened her mouth, but had no chance to say anything, for Carmela was once again looking Rashawn up and down, this time with the expression of someone who'd been asked a personal question by someone who should have been asking her paper or plastic. "Formally introduced? I'll let you know if and when I think we need to be." Oh my God. That is a thing of beauty. Carmela, I have loved her from the start. She's a mess, but I love her. This is everything. I'll let you know if and when I think we need to be. I need to put that somewhere in like my mental file to pull out. I know life will not be kind enough to give me a perfect setup for using a line like that, but I can dream. She turned her back on Rashawn with a grim look and the merest twitch of a wink at Doreen. "Meanwhile, I need to use the bathroom, but make a note for me. When you next hear from my brother, tell him he and I are going to have a talk, because I see that he was pulling my leg. Oh, that's what she's saying when she said no methane and 2 legs. So she asked Kit what their guests were going to look like, and he gave her some bullshit answer, I think is what I'm getting from this. So the moment, let's see, leaving Philip and Scarrett sitting there exuding the pleasure of having met a wonderful being, while Darine and Rashawn stared after her, both briefly mute with astonishment. The moment didn't last long for Rashawn. Her brother was pulling her leg? Does this have some cultural significance? I think it's going to be significant for him when he gets back, Darine said. Who is she? Rashawn said. She's Carmela, our neighbor. One of those lesser life forms you don't want anything to do with? There was a silence that lasted for several seconds, a noticeable period when dealing with Rashawn. She's magnificent, he said at last. There is no surer way to get a dude interested than by acting like a dick to him. I swear to God, it never fails. This is why women are pursued by men they're not interested in. Because men love the like challenge of gaining our interest. So when we genuinely do not give a fuck and would like to be left alone, they can't resist that. And it's so tedious. The ones that you actually want to like be paid attention to a lot of the time, you give them signals, and those very signals are the thing that make them go, nah, I'm bored. And then the ones that you really genuinely would like to never see again, they can feel that coming off you, and they're just like, oh, I must make her love me. And it's just like, why? Just don't. Yeah. So she says, let's see, the alien prince has the hots for Kit's sister. This is too funny. What did she mean? Philip said. She wanted to decorate me. Oh, no, Darine thought. Some of us have a tradition here. There's a time of year when we bring trees into our houses and we put decorations on them. I want to see, said Philip. I'll find you a picture. Shame you weren't here at Christmas. Then she wished she could take the line back. To see thousands of slowly dying trees standing around in vacant lots waiting to be bought by my people and put on display until their needles drop off? Yeah, it's grim, isn't it? Like, I love a real Christmas tree. We got a fake tree for the first time last year because we found out that Owen has actually got a pretty bad allergy to pine. And he was just suffering so bad the year before. I've always said I didn't want a fake tree. I love real trees. And then we got a fake, and it's actually spectacular. I love it. It looks amazing. But I do miss the scent and feel of a real tree. However, I am aware of how kind of like, I don't know, there's something ghoulish about cutting them down to drag into the house and then like toss them on the curb, you know. I understand where the tradition originated, but as with everything, when things get commercialized to a certain point, it then begins to turn a corner and become really gross. So at this point, Darine's like tries to distract by talking about the mall, which immediately gets Carmela back in the room. Someone mentioned the mall. Let's go, Philip said. I want to see the decorations. You all need to put on your disguises first, Darine said, because there will be no end of trouble if you go out the way you are, and I want to see the disguises before we go anywhere. I'm sure I won't need anything to pass unremarked in this culture, Rashawn said. Carmela started to laugh. Oh, you are so funny, she said, and the dry way that she said it brought Rashawn up short. No, of course you don't need to do anything. You look just like everyone around here. Oh, my. She turned away, ostentatiously half covering her face with one hand and throwing a look at Darine that Rashawn could not possibly have missed. Perhaps the lady would show me the correct manner of a disguise for this world, Rashawn said, all haughtiness again, since we have seen so few examples of this world's dress. Darine, can we use the TV for a moment? I'll show him a few things and lay a groundwork. I just love her so much. Bless you, Carmela. Bless you. How are you guys this morning? Doreen said. Everything's well, Scarrett said, though I'm getting hungry again. We'll find you something, Doreen said. And how about you? Philip said. Are you well? Getting better every minute, Doreen grinned. The mall was still fairly quiet, when they got there later that morning. It was Sunday morning, and a lot of the most serious shoppers wouldn't be in for hours yet. There were, however, going to be a lot of kids there who were also on spring break, getting an early start on their malling. Wait a minute. I'm just realizing. Oh, yeah, okay, good. I thought for a second, because you know, guys, how this is the newer version that got sent to me by Patricia, that maybe the audiobook that I listened to skipped a thing, but it goes back. And so it's like, they got to the mall at such and such time. Doreen had been nervous about it, and we sort of back up again, because I was like, did they just skip the whole decision to walk instead? Philip had needed the most coaching. Not surprising. His disguise was no shape change, but a visual illusion keyed to a wizardry he built to mimic human limb action, facial effect, and clothing. The illusion would not withstand close examination, such as being touched, but Doreen had no plans to let anyone near enough to touch him, and told him so. Your people must be very easily shocked, Philip said in a pitying tone of voice. I mean, he's not wrong, and it is a pity. Doreen is asked by Scarrett whether he looks all right, and she's like, he looks excellent. Carmela had talked him more or less into the shape of a slim red-headed surfer guy. And he's wearing a sweatshirt that says, "We'll do magic for food," which he added to his shirt in the speech, which is amazing. She says something about how maybe he should go talk to Carmela about it. And I kind of felt maybe he should not, because I want to know how people would react to that. It's in the speech. Would they be able to read it? Would they instinctively know what it meant? Would it get people's attention, or would they just assume it's just a stupid shirt? I want to know. Rashawn was wearing, over some of his real clothes, a long floppy shirt and large trousers that made him look rather like an unusually elegant rapper. You've got the height to carry them, Carmela had said just a little admiringly. Not many people do. And Rashawn had fallen for the line. Carmela had also made him reduce his epic ponytail to a more manageable length, at least in illusion. The two long front locks in front of his ears had given Carmela the most trouble. Rashawn adamantly refused to put them behind his ears where they would show less. They're supposed to show, he said. What they're going to show here, Carmela said, is that you look a little too different. All you need is for some wise guy to come along and pull one of those. Rashawn looked at her, indignant. Who would dare? I would, Carmela said, suiting the gesture to the concept. And if it's something I'd do, it's something that'll probably occur to other people. This is not your palace, this is a mall. You're entering a world where anything can happen. Mostly having to do with people getting real judgmental about your looks. Listen, she is not wrong. I don't want to think somebody would just walk up to him and yank on his hair, but people are dicks, and they very well might. So, yeah. I love this so much, though. Carmela just being like, all right, I'll take on dealing with this fucking turd. I can't help but wonder if eventually Carmela's going to be like, I'm kind of into him now, though. Because he's listening to her. And that is a very irresistible quality sometimes when you're used to putting your thoughts out there and nobody really paying all that much attention because you're a teenage girl. A guy who's suddenly kowtowing to you, I could see how that could be appealing, especially to somebody like Carmela. Originally, Doreen's plan had been to do a private gating transit. She was astounded to come up against serious resistance to this concept from all her guests. Even Rashawn, who she would have thought would resist so plebeian an option as walking on general principle. And they all just talk about being able to like see the world and wanting to go outside and look around at the neighborhood and where they are. And this is where she says to Philip, you can't walk through it. It's all concrete. I can deal with that, Philip said. I haven't had to walk through any of your floors here. I can manage. So that was the spot where Jacob told me to stop reading. So then is the end. But yeah, I am really interested in what their little trip to the mall is going to look like. I am so into Carmela bossing Rashawn around. It's hilarious. And I'm really nervous about what's going on with Nita and Kit because it seems like they're having a really nice time. And there has to be some kind of conflict, but I also just would like for them to keep having a nice time. I don't know. All right, guys, I am going to wrap up, but thank you again so much for listening. Thank you, Patricia, for hanging out with the chat and commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you guys, I think, this Friday, if I'm not mistaken, with a new episode. Yep, this Friday. So I will see you then. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.